All right, so the Canucks take it 4-3 in the shootout, and as mentioned, they snapped that losing streak, heading home now with heavy hearts, though. And of course, we talked about this right off the top of the show. We got a bunch of Ask J-Pats here, and most of them are about Gino Odjick, really, J-Pat. So I'll give you the honors, because let me tell a small story, and then you take over, because I know you have a wealth of experience, whether it was, watching Gino's career growing up, whether it is being in the media, being around him. I was at the Coliseum once for a Vancouver Giants game, and just between whistles, all of a sudden these two guys, maybe 3-4 rows in front of us, stood up, turned around, and started chanting Gino at the top of their lungs and pointing. I didn't even know Gino Odjick was there. And he's sitting about 4 rows behind us with his family, I assumed. And just the way these guys, and just the whole crowd got behind it, and everybody gave him an ovation. Next thing you know, he's up on the Jumbotron there at the Coliseum when the Canucks were there. It was just one of those moments where you're like, boy, like this guy, like, has he paid for a drink or a dinner, like, since he stopped playing for this team? Like, just the fans absolutely love him. And, legend is one of those statuses that you don't like to throw around too much. I think Gino Odjick qualifies for that in Vancouver.
Yeah, passes away at the age of 52, believed to be from a heart attack. John Shorthouse had to break the news on the broadcast. It was floating around social media, but boy, we've seen that elsewhere. You just have to be certain that news is correct. And so the Canucks confirmed it. And once John had reported it, then you saw the flood on social media. And your story, I'm sure just about everybody in town has that sort of story of, being in his presence and the impromptu Gino chants breakout. I'm guessing that Game and a Hashtag, we probably got some hashtag Ginos or RIP Gino in today. Like when I think of this guy, like his ties to Vancouver started early. He was a 5th round draft choice in 1990. And of course, that draft was at BC Place. I don't know if he was on hand back in those days. Generally, later round guys didn't show up for the draft, but the Canucks, they had a bunch of higher profile picks, Peter Nedved, Sean Antosky. But as it turned out, Gino became one of the true fan favorites of all time. In fact, when you think about popular Vancouver Canucks, I would suggest that he's in a small list, short conversation, and literally fought his way into the National Hockey League. It came from nothing. An Algonquin from Maniwaki, Quebec, the Algonquin Enforcer, the Maniwaki Mauler, the great nicknames for Gino Odjick. And I just look back, he played for the Canucks from 1990 through 1998, and then moved on, played for the Islanders, for Philadelphia, Montreal. Always remember, he got traded for Jason Strudwick, and his on the way out the door, it was, who's that? Like, he didn't know who he had been traded for. And I laugh about that. And Struds has a great sense of humor. And I know Jason going back to when he was playing in Kamloops and I was doing games. So, he handled that one brilliantly. Just a couple of things. His first game, his NHL debut, is the stuff of lore in this town. People still talk about it and will now, forever. But he knew why he was here and what he had to do to carve out a career in the National Hockey League. So in his debut, he takes on Stu Grimson and Dave Manson at the Coliseum, like two of the toughest dudes in the National Hockey League. And right then, this love affair began, because this guy was willing to do whatever it took to, carve his path. And then, the unlikely friendship with Pavel. Here you've got, a First Nations guy from Maniwaki, and you've got the Russian Rocket, and yet they sort of coexisted because Gino stuck up for Pavel and Pavel went to bat for Gino. And, I look at that 1994 team, and Gino played 10 of the playoff games. So he wasn't an every night guy in the postseason, but he got into 10 playoff games. But that year he had 16 goals.
Yeah, I'm looking at that as well.
29 points. Here's the crazy part. So I had to go look on the Hockey Fights database. It says that Gino fought 127 times for the Vancouver Canucks. One season, 33 scraps.
Yikes.
33 scraps. Almost one every other game. I know it's a different era, and knowing what we know about head injuries and trauma and everything else, like that, I cringe, but that's the way the game went. And it was, he was one of so many heavyweights in his era. And just seeing, some of the video that's been pushed out there since his passing, and the game against St. Louis where he just loses it and basically is taking on every member of the St. Louis Blues and chasing Glenn Anderson around out at center ice, and he's stripped down, and Anderson's taunting him because he knows that he can evade and elude Gino,
Yes.
and so there's Anderson just being a sort of weasel in this thing, and Gino he had snapped and was just like trying to get a piece of anybody. I think it was Adam Creighton, and he was just going to town. And there were other videos out there of just some lengthy fights where, no defense, like it just chucking them, and people embraced all of that. So, an NHL career of 605 games. He was inducted into the BC Sports Hall of Fame in 2021, and I'm so glad that, that happened and took place. And his family was there to be around him and to see him inducted into the BC Sports Hall of Fame, and he'll be there for all time. When you talk about stories, like, again, I started my broadcast career in 1993 in Kamloops, and from 93 to 99, I was up there. I came home occasionally and would take in some Canuck games. I was around the team a little bit, but, I don't think of Gino as a guy that I covered necessarily, but he became part of the Canucks alumni. He was always around. You've been at games at Rogers Arena. There's Gino,
always, every game almost.
And when I saw the news, I was thinking to myself, he had slowed down here. He had the health challenges back in 2014 where we thought we were losing him then. And he had blood disorder and some sort of heart condition, was at VGH, and people were holding vigil outside. And these last bunch of years, he has slowed down. And so you would see him at Rogers Arena, and at Gate 9, there are two elevators, dual elevators side by side. One is dedicated for the media, and one is for other people, and it stops on every floor, but the media elevator goes direct to the 500 level. Well, of course, there are guys that get in the media elevator that aren't media. And Gino was one of them. What was I going to tell him? He couldn't be in the media elevator? Come on. Like, no, of course not. So, always had a smile on his face, and he was just a guy that people gravitated to, and we'd see him eating in the media meal in the press box, and people would always stop and ask him how he's doing and smile on his face. And again, I think the health challenges certainly had slowed him down, but it was great to see him around the rink in the Canucks alumni suite, all of those types of things. And I just think when I talked about the people holding a vigil outside of VGH and chanting his name, like, that doesn't happen for many people. But that right there, I think, tells you the bond that this guy, from humble beginnings, working his way to the National Hockey League and working his way into the hearts of so many Canuck fans. And so, yes, it's a sad day. Condolences to his family and his friends and former teammates, and you're seeing tributes all over social media. But, as I acknowledge it's a sad day, I will say, like, my heart is full because I'm thinking of all these memories of a guy that just made you smile. And ultimately, that's a pretty good tribute. I'm not sure that I can offer much more of a tribute than a guy that just put a smile on everybody else's face and made them feel good. So,
and for such a guy that played such a violent way on the ice, like, real mild demeanor though. And I'm sure, like, around his buddies, I'm sure he's a little bit different, but every time I was sort of in his presence, like, he's quiet as a mouse, really.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, right. And I think
the hands stood out. Ooh.
He understood that, that was his role. He wanted to play in the NHL and earn a good living and all those types of things. That's what he had to do. And he played in an era when just about every team had their own Gino, at least the role that he played, maybe not, to the status with the fans, but and a lot of teams had a couple of them. It was a tough way to make a living, certainly. And we still would. I know that there was a movement. We talked about the BC Sports Hall of Fame. There's sort of been this movement to get him into the Ring of Honor. It didn't happen during his life. Could it happen posthumously? I suppose. Was it a missed opportunity? Yeah. Again, we have these great debates about who should be in the Ring of Honor. It wouldn't have been for his playing career and the numbers that he put up. It would be about, forever a Canuck and sort of the way he played himself into the hearts of so many in this fan base. And I saw Francesco Aquilini put out a statement and just talked about, because this is the other part too, and Francesco mentioned it. You think of Gino, a tough guy fighter, after his hockey career, I mean, a huge figure in the Musqueam community here, settled in, was involved in business, had his hands in a number of businesses, I think had been a good conduit between First Nations and the Vancouver Canucks. And so he continued to play a role for this organization long after his playing days and even after he had moved on. And as we said, he played for 3 other franchises. But always a Vancouver Canuck first and foremost, the team that drafted him, the team that he played the bulk of his games for, 605 National Hockey League games. And, for a guy who was known as a fighter, I just wanted to make sure that I did mention that one season of 16 goals. So, you can say whatever you want about guys that played that role. 16 goals is 16 goals. I don't care what era. You're putting 16 goals in the net.
More goals that season than Murray Craven, Greg Adams, Marty Jelena, Jimmy Carson. Okay, he only played 34 games that year. But you see what I'm saying? Like, I mean, he was one, two, three, four, five, fifth on the team in goals that year.
Yeah.
Didn't play a lot in the playoff run though.
No.
Was that due to injury, perhaps? I can't remember.
I think it was more just the style of play. And look, they played Calgary in the first round. We know that there's enough toughness and that rivalry. But I just think the deeper you go into the playoffs, that role wasn't needed and required the way that it maybe was in the regular season.
He averaged 4.2 penalty minutes per game in his career. 2,567 penalty minutes. Topped out 371 in the 96-97 season. And he came close to that in 92-93. So he had 370. Like 300 penalty minutes in a season is unbelievable. Completely different era. Hockey's completely changed now. But boy, he played that role well. And you talk about stepping up against heavyweights. He had some tilts. You go to hockey fights and you see the guys that he doesn't shy away from anybody.
No.
And he had some absolute classics. Let's hear from Stan Smyl, though. Of course, good friends with Gino and played with Gino. He talked about that role that he played and just how tough of a role that was, especially back then.
The role that he was as a player is one of the hardest roles to play in hockey. And he handled it very well. It's a role that you as a player know when you have to be the tough guy and support your teammates. And he was always there for that. And he also knew if, when things weren't going right on the ice or the team wasn't playing quite up to their caliber, that he can go out and stir it up and get the players excited, get them involved in the game. And I guess the best way of saying it, he could bring the team into a fight just by being Gino and the way he was sometimes. So, he was one of the greatest teammates that I played with. I was his first right winger when he came into the NHL. I remember that game against Chicago, the 2 fights that he had. And he took that role, he took it proud, and he just wanted to win as a Canuck.
Imagine that though. Like you're Stan Smyl, and then, I mean, it's probably at the end of his career, I guess, when Gino had come around. But you're Stan Smyl, and you're playing with Gino Odjick on, like, that would be unheard of nowadays, right? I mean, to have a fourth line player, and I guess maybe at that point in Stan's career he was playing a little bit further down the lineup, but that role too. You hear other enforcers talk about that, and just the fact that a lot of them were scared shitless the night before, going into different rinks, knowing like who they're about to face, what they have to do. I mean, people can talk about how much, these fighters, but like it takes a toll on you. And the fact that like you have to get out there and fight somebody, that would be, the anxiety for that would just be way too much for majority of people. And I mean, as you can see, 605 NHL games, like he lasted. And again, he didn't turn down anybody.
So, I mentioned the Chicago, just Stan, honestly, everybody in this town, anybody connected to the Canucks, we all think about Pavel's debut. And it's one of those nights that's going to live forever in the minds of so many. And 18,000 were there at the Coliseum, but hundreds of thousands are going to claim they were there. I was fortunate enough to have been there for Pavel's debut. I can't remember if I was there. As I said, like I moved to Kamloops in '93, so I was here going to school. I can't. I mean, I remember the game. I don't know if I probably would remember it if I was there. But just to hear Stan rattle it off, like honestly, for a lot of people, I think they remember Gino's debut as a Canuck almost as much and almost as fondly as they remember Pavel's debut, and that just kind of speaks to, like, think two totally different players, but they were, that bond that they shared. And again, it was kind of the odd couple, but it worked for the two of them. The other thing, a lot of people will remember, and this will be brought up too, Gino wore number 66 in his debut.
That's right.
Which is so good. Like, you just think what that number means in hockey lore and is associated with. And there was Gino busting into the NHL, breaking out the double sixes, and of course, moved to 29 fairly shortly after. I think once they realized that, he was going to be a regular, but still for him to wear 66.
I wonder if he wanted to wear 99.
As far as you could get from Mario in the player spectrum,
true.
But hey, it worked. It just kind of adds to the story there of his first game in the National Hockey League.
I do wonder if he wanted to wear 99, and they're like, I don't know about that, but we'll let you do 66. All right. Of course, First Nations, Gino Odjick, and it's the influence that he has on other Indigenous hockey players. Ethan Bear was asked about that, just sort of what influence Gino had on him.
Honestly, very sad, to be honest. Gino was there for me when Carolina came to town and we talked, and obviously Vancouver was one of the main places I was most likely getting traded to, and I went and talked with Gino before, and he said, he was rooting for me to come here, and it's very sad news. Like I honestly haven't really talked to my family or my friends about it yet. Obviously it's, I heard I scored right after he passed, so I think that's pretty powerful. It was meant to be. Maybe he was there for me on that shot, and so it's just, I'm just obviously, I haven't really got much to think about it on it yet. But
you can add recruiter to the list of things that Gino Odjick did as well. Hearing Ethan Bear talk about that just when he was with Carolina, and I'm assuming he was a healthy scratch, I guess, at that point, and Gino pulling him aside. And listen, a player like Gino Odjick, the influence that he's going to have on someone like Ethan Bear or the community that he comes from, like that just must be so major, just to know, hey, he came from there, I can do that as well.
Yeah, look, it's such a numbers game. It's astronomical odds against anybody making it to the National Hockey League. The
regardless of your stature,
that's what I mean. And then for Indigenous youth, and I don't think it's easy at all. I think maybe there are a few more pathways now, but some of these guys were trailblazers, and it wasn't just Gino. Stan Jonathan and others, but for Gino, again, back in the early 90s, just against all odds for him to carve out 605 games in the National Hockey League, and then for him to be mentoring guys after the fact, speaks volumes about him and his character. And, as you pointed out, for big, loud fists of fury on the ice, fairly quiet guy, but clearly had time for Ethan Bear and others that have followed in his footsteps to the National Hockey League.
Let's hear some more from Ethan Bear here too, because he was asked by our buddy Patrick Johnson there, just like, did he know who Gino Odjick was growing up? Because he's in his 20s, right? Gino would be well done by the time he was sort of getting interested in the NHL. But here's what he had to say, and I thought this was quite interesting.
Yeah, everybody knew who Gino Odjick was growing up, and he was definitely one of the first Indigenous players to, kind of make a trail for the rest of us. And definitely whenever you lose a legend like that and someone who's honestly a big influence in the Native community, it's tough, right? So definitely it'll be tough, but I'll still have a lot to process on it.
It's not often you get to meet your hero either, is it?
No, not really, and not like even just to work with him. He'd always message me and stuff like that. And if I was playing well, if I needed to step it up, he was always there, to give some little advice. And that's all you can ask for. This league's as hard as it is, and every day you try to get better, but some days are harder than others. And it's always nice to have someone you can look up to and who's been through it as well and to support you. So, definitely going to miss him.
Yeah. Born in 1997, Ethan Bear, and Gino Odjick's last year was the 01-02 season. So, I mean, just to have that sort of impact on somebody who's that young, the distance between the two, just speaks volumes about Gino Odjick.
Yeah, and you're going to hear a ton of tributes here. I mean, we're sharing ours, but we won't be alone, obviously, on a Sunday as we get back into the work week and other shows and programming Monday to Friday. You're going to hear some amazing stories because it just kind of feels like anybody in the hockey circles over the last 30-some years, had a connection to Gino, probably shared an experience or a story or two. And so already seeing a number of tributes from former National Hockey Leaguers is talking about what a great guy and great teammate he was.
Lastly, let's hear one more time from Stan Smyl, because he was asked about, what moment stands out for you. And of course, I mean, everything's so fresh right now. He wasn't able to come up with just one, but he definitely had a lot of fond memories of Gino.
As much as, you try to think of, since we've heard here in the last couple hours, just myself just kind of, playing with Gino and trying to remember a certain situation. But I'll tell you the one thing about Gino's, and I think a lot of people that know Gino and what he did on the ice, he was one of the most funniest guys off the ice. He was always joking, always had light in the dressing room. And that's important to have. And, if there was, some pressure situations, Gino knew when to be able to make everyone laugh and let's be calm about this. We'll get it done. So, yeah, I Patrick, right now, I can't just think of one that jumps out at me.
And you need those guys in the dressing room. And obviously you talked about the odd couple that was him and Pavel Bure. But if you're Pavel Bure playing in the league the way it was at that time, like, you felt probably a foot taller going around the ice, knowing that if anybody messes with you, they got to deal with Gino.
Yeah, and you could hear the emotion there. Stan sort of, all fresh. I think that was done in the second intermission of the hockey game, just after the news had broke, and good for him for being available there. And look, this has been a tough couple of months for Stan Smyl. Lost his wife, Jennifer, training camp. Stepped back for a little while, but he's back around this team. Obviously, things have gone sideways. We know last year the impassioned plea from Stan Smyl for this franchise to get it figured out and turn it back in the right direction, and that hasn't happened yet. It's been, more down this dark path, and then now he loses a former teammate and a friend. So a difficult run for Stan Smyl, but it's certainly good to hear him in that moment relaying some of his memories about Gino Odjick.